Richard RJ Eskow, and you may have noticed in recent months and years that the internet, which has always been an enormous time sink for all of us, seems to be taking more and more of our time and attention. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot, but our next guest has been thinking about much more. Tim Wu is a professor at Columbia Law School. He is the director of the Pollock Center at the Columbia School of Journalism, contributing writer to The New Yorker, well known for, I believe, coming up with the term net neutrality. And his new book is called The Attention Merchants, the epic scramble to get inside our heads. So first of all, Tim, thanks for coming on the program.
Sure, it's great to be here.
And by the way, I've read your book. I really enjoyed it. I felt there was a huge need for it because I think as a lot of people feel, sort of with every passing week, that there's more of an assault on my attention and my focus. And it's getting tougher and tougher to deal with. And as you put in the book, harvesting, I love the use of the word harvesting, human attention and reselling it to advertisers has become a major part of our economy. What gave you the idea to write this book?
You know, it's a great question. I think it comes a little bit from that experience that many of us have where you sit down to write an email and suddenly 3 hours go by and you wonder what just happened. It's like you've been stuck in a casino or something. I think that sense of losing control over your attention and therefore losing control over your time is one of the things that really motivated me to write this book. And I thought it was something a lot of people were dealing with. And I kind of wanted to ask that question, where did it all come from?
And it almost seems as if the architecture of being online now is increasingly being designed to fragment your attention. And I'm one of those people who has attentional problems anyway. And for example, the new thing now in the last year or so, at least I'm noticing it more, is pop-ups when you go to read an article. And if I'm researching something or looking into something and I just start to read it and then a pop-up comes up, it drives me crazy, but two, it's one of a number of things on the internet that seems almost designed to prevent me from using it in a linear fashion and fragmenting me instead, so I might go this way or that way. Am I just being paranoid, or is there something to that?
No, I think what you've noticed is underlyingly a business model in action. So you might think, oh, that's just really annoying, but actually what we're looking at is a web which is increasingly driven by a business model which relies on delivering ad content and almost tricking people to click on stuff. And those are the metrics. And so as long as those are the business metrics, you can expect environments designed to coax you to be fragmented. I mean, that's kind of the point of the book. I kind of go back to casino again. I mean, a casino is not designed to have you like place one bet and leave, or like in a rational way, think carefully about how much money you're spending. It's designed to make it all come out of your pockets, and it doesn't really care what happens to you. It just is designed to keep you going. And I think the web has become a lot like that. It's like an attentional casino. You get in there, you have this valuable thing, your time, and you end up spending hours of it without really thinking about where it all went. And it's different because you don't even really notice. You just kind of notice time went by. It's very fragmenting. The one goal you had gets lost. So that's what I'm writing about. And I think a lot of things, when you want to understand them, you got to go back to the business model.
And I think that's well said. And you're a professor of law as well as journalism. And, it gets to one of the moral issues involved here, which is, I heard somebody say once, we're all working on Zuckerberg's farm now. People think of the internet as a free resource, but this fragmentation and hijacking of attention is taking a lot of everyone's time. And when you take someone's time, that is taking a resource. So there's a transaction being extracted in return for our use of the internet, and invisible costs that can be very large. And isn't that something we should really be grappling with?
I think people should really start to understand that the old adage is right. There is no such thing as a free lunch. We just pay in different ways. if you don't pay with money, then you pay with your time. Sometimes you pay with data. You tell things about people or Facebook or other companies things about you so they can better target you for advertising. You always end up paying one way or another. And I think that is kind of the point of my book is you really just need to understand that. The cost of free is something other than what you think. It might be, well, okay, because I read 1,000 articles on BuzzFeed this month, I didn't do that other thing I wanted to do. I wanted to learn an instrument, or I wanted to, read a novel, or do this other thing, or spend more time with my kids, or whatever it is. That is the cost, is we end up spending more of our time and attention on things we don't really intend to. And that's one of the things about my book. The reason I raise this is, I kind of believe that a life well led is a life where you do what you choose to do. And I'm sort of nervous that many of us are in some ways living lives that are not exactly those of our choosing.
I'm amazed at where I find myself. Tim Wu, author of The Attention Merchants, I think of myself as extremely conscious about this stuff. I write about it, I talk about it, yet I'm amazed how many times I find myself, on a page that's talking about, I don't know, Cyndi Lauper's outfits, or I made that up, but it's just amazing how easily you can get redirected. And that gets me to a point, something in your book that caught my eye. For some reason, you were talking about one of the early advertising innovators before, technology, modern technology came along. People were doing this with newspapers and so on, as you explore in your book. And I think it was Claude Hopkins or someone you're talking about. Yeah. And I found this sentence which attracted me just for the sound of it. Except for the fuchsia boutonniere he always wore, he was indifferent to self-adornment. And it struck me as maybe a slight sidetrack, but it made me think of Mark Zuckerberg wearing the same T-shirt and hoodie every day. It's almost as if there's a kind of person who's quasi-puritanical about self-expression through clothing or whatever. And Zuckerberg will say, he doesn't want to give any time to thinking about what he's going to wear today. But that's not where he wants his mind to go. So he's very disciplined about his own application of attention, doesn't even want to match a shirt and pants, but and yet is an expert at harvesting yours. Is there a person, did you think there was maybe a personality type for this kind of attention merchant as you went through studying the history of this?
Yes, most definitely. The book is a story of many of the pioneers of attention harvesting, including Claude Hopkins, who just described, the first real copywriter, sort of the model for Don Draper, for people who ever watched the TV show Mad Men. And they have very distinctive personalities, particularly the people in advertising. One link that many people may not realize is a lot of the early advertising people had backgrounds in organized religion. Hopkins himself had been a preacher in, I think, Baptist church. Many of them, in some ways, used the devices of religion to try to, when they were inventing advertising, essentially the promise that if you do this, you will get that, pretty straightforward. In religion, it tends to be, if you pray and believe in God, everlasting life will come to you. This was more like, if you, use mouthwash, you'll get married, or toothpaste, you'll have more friends, or whatever it is, just that kind of idea of promising one thing for another. And the characters who are in advertising and in the game of attention merchanting, they're unusual. They have, I think, very powerful intuitions about what catches other people's attention. They themselves are often attention seeking in their own ways, one way or another, but they just have some weird understanding of how to hold a crowd. And there's people who are like that. They just know what it is to say that gets people riveted, and or they understand, in some ways they understand just how vulnerable we are to the right kind of messages. Maybe I'll say that much.
And also how to reach us. It's a very interesting point, Tim Wu. Whatever your personal theology may or may not be, the fact is religion has been in the business of persuasion for millennia. And so whether it comes to what you were just talking about, the kind of promissory nature of it, and future orientation of it, or just the great, compelling phrase making, render unto see. I mean, the Bible, the Quran, all the great works of theology are very good at creating phrases that stick in the mind at least as well as things go better with Coke, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to suggest is advertising, I think, just borrowed those tricks, essentially. Give us this day our daily bread, Coke the real thing, Lucky Strike, reach for a lucky instead of a sweet. Thou shalt not have other God beside me. I think that the idea of powerful slogans that drive a movement is the original idea of propaganda, which was a religious idea and eventually made its way into advertising. So a lot of this book is, in some ways, about how commerce and government plays a role here too, especially in some of the totalitarian states. Hitler comes to mind. Use the techniques of religion, both the slogans, the promises, the iconography, the unforgettable logos, the image of God or the image of the corporate brand, to get access to more and more of the human mind. That is basically the big thesis of this book, and I think goes some direction towards explaining the times we live in.
And speaking of the human mind, and we're talking with Tim Wu, author of the new book, The Attention Merchants. At one point in the book, you describe Timothy Leary, who had been a psychologist at Harvard and had left over the LSD experiments, meeting with Marshall McLuhan, who was, of course, the guru figure of media thinking and philosophy in the 60s. You write that McLuhan was fairly sympathetic to Leary's project and was telling him told him the key to your work is advertising it, and even composed a jingle for him then and there. Lysergic acid hits the spot, 40 billion neurons, that's a lot. I couldn't believe that. That's a true story, though, I take it.
It is a true story. It's recounted, at least in Timothy Leary's memoirs, and I think it's mentioned by McLuhan's people. Now, how exactly the dialogue went, I mean, Leary used a lot of LSD, so some of his memoirs might not be 100% on, but it sounds realistic. And then Leary took that advice. He did decide that if he wanted to have a social movement, he needed a better slogan. And then, it came time for the 1969 San Francisco Be-In, and he came in with drop out, tune in. Wait, am I going to get it wrong?
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
There we are.
Which
yes,
Mad Magazine promptly satirized as turn on, tune in, drop dead. But look, he went from being nobody. I remember, I was just a little kid, but I remember Leary went from being nobody with that slogan to being on the cover of Mad Magazine with Alfred E. Newman, the Mad Magazine logo, dressed as Timothy Leary. So that's how big an influence he had. There was an Outer Limits parody of Timothy Leary within a couple months. So obviously, someone like Leary took the lessons of advertising very much to heart and was very effective at it, right?
Yes, that's true. I'll say one thing that's interesting about Leary is he essentially understood what I'm trying to get at this book very deeply. He felt that we spent too much time then with television, commercial media, and that he felt that what people needed to do was turn inside, spend more time thinking inwardly, maybe spending time with friends, listening to music, taking LSD on spiritual discovery, that sort of things. For him, LSD was a technology, the same way we think of, virtual reality or something. I think he thought it differently. Now we're like, oh my goodness, LSD. He thought, well, it's kind of like virtual reality. It kind of just takes you to a different kind of consciousness. And I just want to stress that what he had in mind is he said, we need to recapture our attention and seize it for ourselves, not let it be commercialized. It had some impact, but in the end, I would say the forces of commerce won in the long term.
Yeah, well, that for the time being, I would say, being the perennial optimist. But that leads me, Tim Wu, to our last question. Is there a way, I consider this stuff pernicious and frightening and disturbing, and I'll be saying that right until I'm, off looking at cat videos later tonight. But is there a way to fight back?
I think there's two ways that I'll mention. So first, I wouldn't overrate your powers of self-control. I think if you want to have more control over your attention, you have to draw some pretty thick lines, like as opposed to going to the internet and think you can ignore cat videos. I mean, those things are well designed to reach the deepest parts of your brain and activate them. So instead of thinking you're going to, I'm going to be on the internet a while, but it'll only be 10 minutes or something, you can't take that position. You have to cut a line and say, not going to touch the computer for this entire day or something. Or if you're trying to get writing done, which I often try to do, I have a stripped down version of a computer that I use. You have to be very firm. The other thing I'd say when it comes to content is just think a lot about how you get your entertainment, and think about paid options, buying books or watching films without, or TV that doesn't have ads, or subscribing to stuff you think is good. Now, what's annoying is when you subscribe and it still has ads, but
right.
Trying to, things like Netflix don't, and Amazon Prime. And so just being very conscious of the business model of what you are engaging in is very important. I go back to the casino. Casino does not make money with you going down and setting one bet. They want you there for a long time, and it's the same. There's an industry that wants your time and attention, and if you're not pretty hard line about it, they're going to get it.
Well, that's great advice. And by the way, casino floors are also designed so that you can't find your way out. So if you don't want to get stuck there, the best way is not to go in. So first of all, thanks for coming on the program, Tim Wu. And secondly, thanks for writing the terrific book on the attention merchants, subtitled The Epic Scramble to Get Inside Our Heads. Thanks for coming on the show, Tim.
Been a pleasure. Talk to you next time.
You bet. And we will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.